Hello, welcome to another edition of Inspired to Act from Thrive Ireland. I'm Diane Holt.
And I'm Will Leach. Hello.
We hope the people you meet on this podcast will help you think how your community could change. What might inspire you to act? And again, this time we're introducing you to an ordinary person with a Christian faith. Someone who's often stepped out in faith with God and has had some incredible experiences.
So this time, we're still in Studio 2 at Commission, but we're also connecting to Bulawayo in Zimbabwe in southern Africa. South Africa's to the south, Botswana's to the southwest, Zambia to the north, and Mozambique to the east. The older members of your family might remember the name Rhodesia. Later there was independence and the name changed to Zimbabwe 45 years ago in 1980. There were also years of conflict and civil war. There was Robert Mugabe as the nation's president for many years. He died 5 years ago. Zimbabwe's people have known war and economic hardship, great stress and poor living conditions.
We want you to meet the Reverend Yuseni Sibanda, the Chief Executive of the Zimbabwe Christian Alliance, an alliance determined to speak truth to power, an alliance which insists that Christians should be active, contributing citizens if change is to come. So welcome, Yuseni.
Wow, thank you so much for welcoming me, Dan and Will. I'm glad to be here on this podcast.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you with us, and thank you for setting everything up and connecting to us this time.
Yes, it's great. It actually looks like you're in heaven because everything is so white and there look like there are clouds floating in the background on your screen.
Wow, thank you so much. Well, I'm just here in Bulawayo. We have a serious heat wave. Climate change is on us. We've never had such temperatures. We're almost on 40, which is very hot.
40 degrees.
Oh, that's very hot.
Yeah, it was exactly freezing when I got up this morning in East Belfast.
Wow.
So there you go. 40 degrees of difference, my word.
So Yuseni, we have known each other for a good few years now because of the Inspired Individuals programme. But I thought it would be really, really helpful for people to start to get to know not just you, but also a little bit about Zimbabwe, which seems like a really faraway place. But can we start with you first? So Tell us a little bit about the young Yuseni. What was family life like back in, well, I suppose, what would have been then Rhodesia, is that right?
Yep. I grew up in the townships here in Bulawayo. So basically Zimbabwe at that time was divided into, according to races. You could not live in certain areas. So we lived in African townships, which is where people of color like me lived. And you probably couldn't cross the boundaries. I was fortunate enough that most of my childhood, my father cushioned me a lot. I was in church most of the times. So we didn't, to a certain extent, we didn't face the struggles that an ordinary person in the township would. We did, of course, with others, but I think people suffered more. Other people suffered more. They wouldn't have, 3 meals a day. You wouldn't find them at that time. The level of education was also poor, and because because of segregation. But also it was a time of war. There was a liberation struggle at that time, so things were not normal. But I'm glad that in 1980, when we got our independence, things began a bit to normalize. We could live together, all Zimbabweans, but also we went to school now, and the level of education had really improved. It was equal for everyone.
And what age were you in 1980 then?
Yes, I was about 13 years old, and I was finishing my grade 7, moving on into high school. So we were still pretty young, but could see what was going on.
So you said that you were very involved in the church, and your father had made sure that you were going to church and involved. But do you remember a time when things started to make a real difference to you in terms of your faith?
Yes, well, I grew up within the Catholic faith, and I grew up serving in the church. I did catechism. I did all the lessons within the Catholic church catechism and doctrine. You then get confirmed. So I served from grade 1. I served as an altar boy up to Form 4. So that's quite pretty long years. And I at some point I wanted to be a priest as well. So, but however, there was a time when I was doing around when I was about 20s, the Catholic charismatic movement came to our parish. And so they further explained our faith in a way that made me to get personal commitment to the Lord Jesus Christ, so that I could understand my faith and look at the other teachings on the other sacraments that I'd received, like, catechism, communion, and so forth. They're very good. But then there was this thing that I lacked, which was my own personal relationship, to the Lord. So I got that. When I was born, I got baptized. So my other name is Joseph. So that's my Catholic baptism name. So yeah. So now I think I got to renew my faith, got to make a commitment and a better and a deeper understanding of baptism, my personal commitment to the Lord. So that helped me. And I moved to Harare then for my polytechnic or higher education. That's when I started to do a course in journalism. But my movement to Harare, which is the capital city of Zimbabwe, made me to attend a Baptist church. So I evolved to be part of the evangelical communities at that time, because I was now with the Baptist church. And so that made me to evolve to the evangelical community and an evangelical in-gathering every Sunday, which was slightly different from the Catholic Mass service.
Just a bit.
Yes, just a wee bit.
And me serving there. So that was a major change in my life. So when I was within the Baptist church, we did a lot of lessons on the Bible and learning a lot and growing in my faith. And so that really made a tremendous change in my life. But I also, at the same time, I finished my communication program that I was doing. And that helped me to qualify as a journalist. And I then worked for a daily newspaper called The Chronicle. So this is the daily newspaper for Bulawayo, the second largest city in Zimbabwe. So that also brought in a new dimension because I was more involved in community. I could, listen to people's stories. I went around to investigate stories, but it made me understand my community and the challenges that people were facing. And also I had to interface that with my faith to say, okay, what does my faith say about all this? So I needed to understand. And to a large extent, then the social teachings of the Catholic Church helped me to interpret a lot of things I was seeing. But my evangelical theology and understanding was limited. So there's a lot of challenges around that, yeah.
From one journalist to another, I'm interested in how you would assess Zimbabwe now. How would you assess its religious makeup and how society works in that regard?
Yeah, well, Zimbabwe, it's, now as we speak, we have about 90% or more Christian, people of Christian faith, various Christian faith. So these are Protestants, these are Catholics, and we have a growing number of young people within the evangelical movements, the charismatic movements. So that's the huge number. And in terms of Muslim population, it's about 0.01 or 2% of the population and other faiths. But also remember, some of these people, maybe 50, 60% will still be very traditional in their beliefs. So we have I would say we have a highly Christian community, but with different understandings of Christianity. How do their faith apply to the social, economic challenges that we are facing? How do you apply your faith to that? And how does your faith change those challenges you are facing on a day-to-day basis? Because you can have a hyper faith, where people have hyper faith and want to just go to heaven, and they're not addressing day-to-day challenges.
Yeah, so their focus is on heaven. Yuseni, you were a journalist and you were really learning through the eyes of a journalist about the needs of your community. So how come you ended up then going to be ordained? Because you'd sort of come from that perspective in the church and then ended up in journalism. And I suppose you went full circle back to wanting to be ordained again.
Yes, what happened is that I then joined the Evangelical Fellowship of Zimbabwe. I became part of their team. I really felt a calling to move beyond just broadcasting in the public square, but to rather also use my skills and knowledge as part of missions. And I looked at missions from a different point of view to say, my mission is not, just going to a geographical area, but I could use my giftings, these media spaces, to actually change my community. And I had then time to be in the UK at a place called Oxford Center for Mission Studies. So that really was very formative in my understanding to say, okay, I need to look at how do we transform issues that are facing our community using our theological understandings, but bringing transformation to the community. So, yeah, one thing led to the other. And so from when I came back to the UK, to Zimbabwe, that's when we started the Zimbabwe Christian Alliance, which was more now ecumenical in its approach. It embraced other Christian faiths like the other Protestants. We were looking at Catholics, but just looking at conflict issues within Zimbabwe. How do we solve them? There are historical conflicts, there were emerging conflicts that people had within community, but also how do we do advocacy to change local governance issues or national issues? How do we engage in a way that can change those issues, change policies?
So you say quite sort of blithely, I came back from Oxford to Zimbabwe. But I mean, things were not great in Zimbabwe at the time. I'm sure it must have been tempting to stay in the UK. I mean, after all, you have a British passport and, you could have stayed if you'd wanted.
Yes, well, the issue was that at that time when I decided to come back, Zimbabwe had totally collapsed. Totally collapsed. I mean, how collapsed was it? We were using $1 billion and $1 trillion notes. For you to go and buy bread, you needed to, to put all the money in a big travel suitcase just for one bread.
Oh,
yeah,
it's awful.
So if you look on social media, if you look on the media on the internet, you'll see at that time people put a boiled egg and a $1 trillion note alongside. That's how it was worth.
And what year was that? When would that have been?
That was around 2005. That's when I came back. 2005, 2006. The country had collapsed completely. They were printing money every day. They would have to print new notes.
And so you just decided, I'm going to leave the UK and go back to this total and utter chaos and awfulness. You really must have felt called.
Yes, well, it was really, I felt a calling that I could stay in the UK with the family, but I felt that God really called me back home. And that is where I felt my purpose will be fulfilled. Because I believe that what makes a difference in your life is not where you are geographically located, but it is how you fulfill your purpose in life. And so I really felt I had to come back. And that's when we formed the Zimbabwe Christian Alliance, because we felt it's a better platform. It's more ecumenical, more inclusive. And we started several campaigns to help transform our context. And we begin to engage the church to rethink on its theology. That it can't be the church, we can't go on as if it's business as usual with an economy where we're using $1 trillion just to buy bread.
Were you frustrated? Did the church not seem to be engaging at all at the time?
Yes, well, I think there were issues of fear. People were afraid, but also weighing into that was also the understanding and theology and the role of the church in a context like ours. Should the church be involved at all, And so we had to go into scriptures as well to understand what is God's heart for justice, for poor and vulnerable people. What does God expect us to do to be a voice of the voiceless? How do we become a church that is salt and light in a community like ours? How do we become a church that is without walls, a church that operates outside its walls, and that is concerned about the community. We're constantly asking ourselves this question: what would Jesus do if he was in our context? In 2005, our government demolished people's houses. These were called squatters or illegal
This was in the
structures.
townships?
Yeah, in the townships and in the squatter camps. These were informal settlements that were built by people outside the townships. So we had almost 500,000 people affected by that. And, people moved into churches. They, when
Literally
this
into
happened,
church buildings?
yeah, into church buildings. This was during winter and it was very cold. So people moved into church buildings. These were women and children. And we had to mobilize churches to say, well, instead of the church going to the people came to the church. So
Literally?
this was very new. And so the church didn't know what to do. Within our beautiful buildings, there were women and children who were coming from the cold. And so we had to mobilize, nurses, doctors, health workers, social workers to assist the situation. At one point, we had more than 5,000 people that we were looking after.
You see, there's something
And
very interesting there, because non-Christians often get very agitated about this. They're quite happy to let churches look after people so that the government doesn't have to pay to. But they get very upset when Christians start speaking about issues that they regard as political. And in the Zimbabwe Christian Alliance, you have no fear of that. You will speak truth to power on political issues. In the past, you said, for example, that Robert Mugabe should set down, and I don't mean you, I mean the Alliance, but that involvement that goes beyond helping people, very important, that political involvement does alarm people sometimes.
yeah, well, but look, I think the key issue is political, pastoral engagement with government, but it is not partisan. Because I think the problem that is there is if we are doing it supporting a particular party, a political party, then we have a problem. It becomes politically partisan. But I think if it is concerned about vulnerable people, orphans, and widows, and as church, we are speaking about their conditions and how their conditions can be improved, can be changed. If someone deems it to be political, it's fine. But that is our mandate as church, to feed the poor, to take care of the poor. But we cannot just address the fruits. We have to address the root cause of that problem. And so when we address the root cause, it means really engaging with structures, with power structures, with injustice. So this is not just about politicians and politics. It can be to do with business. It can be that business is unfairly treating people. And so we have to engage with them. But it could be political as well. Like in our context, it's a mixture of both. Like right now, part of our big engagement is around Chinese businesses that are actually digging up coal in the Hwange area, which is Hwange near Victoria Falls, which most people know. They're digging up the whole area for coal and, degrading the environment, leaving holes all over the place, damaging the environment. And so we're challenging Chinese businesses, speaking the truth to them. So it's not just about politics, but it's any system or structure that disadvantages people. So that's I think that we have to say that. So we issued a lot of pastoral statements, but it also changed the approach of the church here in Zimbabwe. We now, in most cases, the church would write pastoral letters, the Zimbabwe Catholic Bishops' Conference, or Zimbabwe Heads of Christian Denominations, or Zimbabwe Council of Churches, or Evangelical Fellowship of Zimbabwe. They'll all speak now into government. But it was, I think, part of our legacy that we left to the church, that you have to be a prophetic voice, you have to speak truth to power, and very strong statements to government.
It's no small thing to get Christians to agree on a prophetic voice, though, is it?
Yeah, I know it's not, but it's. I think sometimes also conditions force you to, as church, to begin to rethink on your theology. I think it's context which also forces people to rethink. Some of the challenges that we have faced force the church to work together. As churches, we are pastoring people in this context, and people come to you on Sunday or whatever day you meet, with these problems. And so you need to pastorally engage with them so that you can change their context.
So it's a holistic response. It's not just about their spiritual welfare, but it's about all aspects of their welfare, their social and their economic.
Yes.
And Usaini, it must be quite a challenge to the government, because you said 90% at least of the population are Christian. So if the church is now beginning to be mobilised through all of those different platforms that you talked about, that is potential to really have an impact. You know, the church has the potential to have a really big voice and an impact on the government. Have you had a pushback? I mean, have you found that some of your people have been in danger? How has the government responded? Because I don't think it's improved greatly, or in fact, it's probably got even worse since Mugabe died.
I think that what's happening is that obviously governments, wherever you speak about issues that affect people, change of policies, you stand to be misunderstood. You stand to be deemed as if you are now working with opposition or you are undermining government work. That's very possible, or it happens in contexts like ours. However, what is very important is that the church must always remain non-partisan. It must never be seen to be partisan. It must remain non-partisan. The church must be partisan to justice, must be partisan to fairness, must be partisan to issues of non-violence. The church must be able to speak about corruption and be able to say corruption drains the nation of natural resources and money that should go to hospitals, schools, and so forth. So all those things are our mandate. It doesn't matter which government comes into place. They will always be uncomfortable. So that's what we have realized, that all governments, globally, even locally, they'll be very uncomfortable when they are challenged by the church. But the church needs to maintain that stance. And it needs to be in a space where it is not actively working towards taking power itself, because then it loses being salt and light. The church must actively work at ensuring that there is accountability, the people are treated fairly, disadvantaged or vulnerable groups are actually protected, and the church must provide those safety nets and speak on behalf of those people. So yes, I mean, you run into risk of being misunderstood, and that's part of the deal.
I think back in the day, you were more than misunderstood. I think you were you think you were being watched. Usaini, is that not right?
Yeah, well, that's. I mean, look, we have had in 2006 when we started Christian Alliance, 7 of our pastors were arrested. They spent a week in jail. We've been in and out of questioning because of the context where people feel that the church should not be speaking, the church should not be saying what it is saying. So this is the cost of being a disciple of Christ, and the cost of speaking on behalf of vulnerable people. Like I was mentioning to you, for instance, the Chinese companies that are here in Zimbabwe, they're not happy when we spoke to them and said, look, you can't be digging up coal in people's homesteads, digging up graves because you want to get coal, but also, using chemicals that pollute the rivers where livestock and other people treat. So that's big businesses. They're not happy.
They're not used to being spoken to like that, are they?
Yes, but also we have to go to government and say, what are your budget priorities? How are we, ensuring that everyone is taken care of? How are we dealing with corruption? How are we ensuring equity and fair distribution of resources? So that the church, if the church cannot say that, no one else will say it.
So you're speaking, but can you give me any examples of where you've really had impact?
We've set up local peace committees. So these local peace committees are structures led by church leaders at district and village level, where we've trained them on how do you deal with local conflict. So they are focused on local conflict. They identify the issues. They also engage on those issues. So you find that we have almost 46 of these local peace committees across the country, but they are dealing with very urgent, relevant issues. And they've managed to stop. We have an area like Gwanda where there was a lot of gold and a lot of artisanal miners, so they would kill each other fighting for that cause. We've set up local peace structures, and it has reduced the levels of violence. It has reduced the people who have died from there. We also, in 2007 and 2008, we ran a campaign called Save Zimbabwe Campaign. And this campaign led to a demand for free and fair elections in Zimbabwe. And it led to a good level playing field in 2008 and eventually led to a unity government being formed, which, for us, provided that time of cohesion where Zimbabweans could work together. Because at the end, we are saying every Zimbabwean belongs here to Zimbabwe, and there must be a way we can work together, people of different opinions, different beliefs, but being able to work together for the building of the nation. And so this has been really our aim.
Do you think it's working? Are you making a difference?
Yes, we think so. If you look at, like I explained to you, the number of local peace committees we have formed, these local peace committees have solved so many problems, from gold mining violence to political parties working together at a local level. We just before our elections, people signed peace pledges where they were committing themselves to respect each other, to respect each other's political opinion, and not cause violence against other people. We have also managed to train traditional leaders to do a lot of work dealing with the past that happened in this country. And so you find that it's been a process. And now we are doing a lot of work with young people. We are training them on advocacy, identifying local issues, because we are now looking into the future as well. How do we develop the next generation of Christian activists, Christian peace builders? And so we have to deliberately invest in the future of our next generation.
Yeah, so that's something we need to really reflect on here in Northern Ireland. How are we impacting in terms of building up the next generation who are going to begin to bring that transformation? One of the things you said, though, Usaini, was about dealing with the legacy of the past, and that's something that we in Northern Ireland really struggle with. Can you tell me a little more about what it is that you're doing there in terms of that, dealing with the legacy?
Well, we are supporting a chiefs process that aims to document what happened in this country between 1983 and up to about 1987.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because a lot of our listeners won't know.
Yeah, so there was internal, immediately after independence, there was a lot of internal disturbances and violence within Zimbabwe, mostly because there were two liberation movements. And after independence, one of those movements won, the other one didn't, but instead of forming a united front, they ended up being conflict between those two liberation movements. And unfortunately, civilians were affected. And so this process I'm talking about is going to document how many people are affected, what kind of issues happened to them, and then government intends to get a report, and then maybe PROCEP will look at how do they compensate people and so forth.
So many people were killed?
Well,
lost
we don't
land?
know the numbers, but the Catholic CCJP, when it did its report called Breaking the Silence, estimated 10,000 people were killed at that time. This needs to be verified and documented, but that's sort of the figures we are looking at that people are talking about. The Catholic Bishops' Conference actually did a lot of work during that time to ensure that they bring the nation back. And December 22, which is Unity Day here in Zimbabwe, actually celebrates the stoppage of that and the peace agreement that was signed. But you can see that it was not enough because now we are still starting afresh to do the documentation, allowing the survivors to tell their stories, and also explorations being made to say, okay, what do we do about people maybe who do not have documents, people who need to get health care? This is 40 years after. But there's need to deal with that because it's like a wound. If the wound is never treated, it will not heal. So we need to treat that wound in order for the nation to move forward.
We understand that because it's 26, 27 years since our peace deal, and we have had a lot of people on this podcast say we haven't really moved very far forward and we haven't dealt with a lot of the issues. We've just had an absence of the same kind of conflict most of the time. That's in one sense a little bit depressing because if you say we've got to 40 years and we're still working through it, we don't like the sound of that. Yeah. When our government recommends changes, we find that often they're not changes the people representing victims want to see. Have you had difficulties like that?
Yeah, well, I think all processes like this need to be victim or survivor centered. Unless you have churches and civic society, on the sidelines, demanding that this process be victim-centered, having it designed in a way that allows the survivors and victims to take center stage, it can easily be derailed by other people. So for us, this has been the issue to say, okay, let's allow survivors and victims to tell their stories so that they can be documented. Most of them are now in their 70s, so they are very old, actually. This could be their only opportunity to say what happened to them and find a way of releasing themselves from that.
Yeah, I think it's very important to give the victim survivors an opportunity to speak. And we've had others who have been on this podcast who've talked a bit about the legacy of the past issues here. One of the things that I'm really interested in, and I know you mentioned it when you visited here to Northern Ireland a few years ago, Usaini, was the Christian Vote campaign that Zimbabwe Christian Alliance really moved forward. Can you tell us a little bit about that and the impact that it had?
Yeah, so in 2008, we actually decided to say, okay, the Christian community, one of our biggest problems is we complain, but we don't participate. So it's okay, we are praying. Like here in Africa, people will say, we want to pray the whole night. But we said, instead of that, you can pray, no problem, but you must also act. So we mobilize people to register to vote. And then on the days of voting, we mobilize them to actually go out and vote. Because the Christian community constitutes the majority of people in this nation, but it is not participating in national processes. It is not participating even in the voting process. And so people wait for results to come out and other people to go and vote, and then they start praying. So we said, you go and vote for whatever party you want to vote for, but you must participate. And part of our campaigns also we ran where we were saying that only God can see who you have voted for, so that people know about the secrecy of the vote, that their vote will be secret.
And then I think you resurrected it again in the later 2000 teens.
Yes. So we've refined it. We've been.
But it was something more about the character, wasn't it? You were trying to help people to vote because of character, not because of maybe their tribal lines.
Yeah. Yes. And also, so part of it evolved from just participating, but to also say, when you vote for someone, are these people, is that person going to cause violence? Is that a person of integrity? Is that person against violence and corruption? What are they offering to you? And so that people look beyond party lines, but they actually look at the individual. And unfortunately, this past election, we had fewer women participating. And so that has been a major issue. Would like to see more women participating in our national politics. And there's also a push for our younger people, the next generation. But I think generally the issue of integrity is very important. Good leadership, servant leadership. Is that person there to serve or they want to gain, when they take over leadership? And so we're asking voters or people who vote to really reflect more and the church to take lead and help them to do that.
Yeah.
You've talked a great deal, Usaini, about church community activism, consultation, transformation, things that make Diane's eyes light up. You know the UK, you know Ireland pretty well, and you've lived and worked in this part of Europe. Looking at us now from afar, and we love learning from how others see us, does the Western Church, particularly the Western European Church, even begin to understand that need for activism and involvement and community engagement?
Well, I think part of it is born out of context. I think Europe has been doing fairly well in terms of, prosperity, good working systems. But in the context where there's problems, we know that 2024 has been a very difficult year for everyone. And the whole world globally is likely to go probably into an economic recession. More suffering will come. We have war in Ukraine, which was war in European souls we have never seen. I mean, people couldn't imagine European refugees, but they were there, So I think the context of difficulties with economic challenges, the introduction of AI now will make many people lose their jobs. So there's generally going to be, I don't want to be depressing on this podcast, but, it's likely that the whole world globally with climate change. So I think the church usually works up under, persecution, but also under problems. I'm sure the European church will begin to ask itself a lot of questions. If you look at the church in Northern Ireland, we are now talking about how does the church respond to violence, peace building, and so forth. You'll not find that probably in other European contexts where there is peace. But the church is being forced to be contextual, to think about this situation. In Africa, we've had our own fair share of problems. Post-independence, we've had challenges. We have challenges of hunger, challenges of poverty, corruption. So the church is being forced to be light in those, light and salt. So I think the European church, to answer your question, might not have seen this as a problem for itself, but rather as a problem, say, in Africa and Asia. And so it has been, look, for years, the European church has been very good mobilizing resources to go and assist. But I think it's now coming full circle that in Europe itself, there will be challenges which will need the church to respond to. Look at the States, United States of America. They are having two fresh challenges that no one ever thought about.
Yeah.
Even democracy is shrinking, receding, and they are having many questions. And the church will be forced to rethink on many things that it has not thought about. I think difficult context and situations make us to rethink on our theology, on our approaches, reimagine our futures. And so, I think the context will change. But I would like to say probably the church, because of prosperity in Europe, it might not have faced the same difficulties that Africa has.
But it might start thinking about it now.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's going to be lots of, because of poverty, recession, unemployment, there's going to be a lot of thinking around that. And like we're talking about artificial intelligence, the way it's moving in and making people rethink on some things that we wouldn't have thought about.
You obviously have been at the forefront of mobilising a lot of church engagement and obviously also back challenging to the government, but you don't do that without a good woman behind you and a lovely family. So tell us a wee bit about your family and how they have supported you in all this.
Yeah, well, we have, my wife is Olivia and I have 2 girls and 1 boy. And so we've built that foundation also. My girls are already beginning to be activists as well. And also my children are rethinking of their contexts. Even my son is rethinking, how do I change my context and my situation? So I think it's also building what we have into the next generation to make them challenge situations and not just take anything lying down. My wife is actually an entrepreneur, so we're running a small business, backyard business at home, through some of the resources we got from inspired individuals. That has been part of the work that Diane has been doing. But it's also saying, how do we support ministries where we're working? So that has been the situation and context. And Zimbabwe's economy would need us in ministry, in church ministry, to have ways of supporting ourselves.
Oh, no, absolutely, because I realise, I think, was it last year that the doctors went on, and teachers had to go on strike because they weren't even being paid the minimal wages that they actually get. So that was a big challenge. Anyway, one of the things that I always ask each of our podcast interviewees is we want to try and help other people to start getting engaged. And it's lovely to hear that because of your modelling all this, your children are actually getting involved. Yeah. So what small bit of advice or hope would you give so that other people can think about maybe making a small difference in their community?
Well, I think people always want to think of big things. I think a small difference. But, now, for the past month, I've been doing prison services at our local prison. I've been visiting. It's small things. This week, they're having a family week. For instance, they've said to us, well, there are some prisoners who will not have anyone visiting them. So I've created people that are going to go and visit them that will become their family. So I've said to them, take an hour from work, bring some fruits, you just go and listen to this person. He is in a prison day in, day out. There isn't much, to do here in prison. So at least an hour of someone just listening and talking to them will make a big difference. So it's small things that people can do. Do you look at your neighbors? Is there something you can do with your neighbors? Or there's a burst, water pipe. Yes, get it repaired by the council, but also begin to challenge the council. Do we have a budget to change and have new pipes, put on in our area? Or can we drill boreholes if it is in a rural area? Do we have a budget for that? Those are small changes you can make, but they are incremental. They'll build up.
Yeah, I think we always expect other people or the government to do it for us, but actually maybe we do need to be a wee bit of doing some things for ourselves and advocating to get things done.
Think about you doing it yourself. Maybe get a friend or someone else that's already mobilizing people to say, well, here is a cause, here is a reason. We can change this. And also reimagining your situation in another way. How do you reimagine your context? Rethinking around that, and it will help you have new ways of doing. But last but not least is the hope. Most people lose hope. So hope is a very important substance and ingredient for us. So I think you need to pick up hope and say, well, my situation can change. If we had $1 trillion to use as currency to buy bread, how hopeless can you become?
Casting that vision of hope. Listen, thank you so much.
Yuseni, thank you for joining us. Thank you for explaining so much so patiently to us and taking the time. It's quite clear there's a big job to do in Zimbabwe, but also you've taken time to think about us and explain things to us, so we're very grateful. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks for Dan and Will for inviting me and just sharing my little story and little things we have done in our context. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks to you for listening to us. Thanks to the Community Relations Council and also to Commission Christian Radio for making this series possible. If you have a thought or a comment about Inspired to Act, you can send us a text from your podcast app, and we'd really love to hear from you.
And you can find out more about Thrive Ireland at thriveIreland.org. Find Thrive Ireland on Instagram and Facebook too, and there's even a YouTube channel.
So, back soon. Bye for now.
Bye.